This is shocking as we have a major Toronto Maple Leafs prospect update as top prospect Dennis Hildeby has made some shocking comments that could pay huge dividends going forward for the Toronto Maple Leafs future. So to break that down in this episode and discuss what exactly the impacts of his comments could be. Stay tuned for that. But before we do, if you're part of the percentage or aren't subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit that button. It would mean the world to Darius and myself as we produce these daily Leafs content for you guys. And there's a lot to go over today. And the Toronto Maple Leafs have a lot on their plate this offseason. Obviously, there's the Mitch Marner trade stuff, there's Nick Robertson trade stuff, but Darius, today we're going to focus on prospect Dennis Hildeby, and he made some very interesting comments. And if you rewind back to a couple weeks ago, Ethan Cowan had some comments about making this year's Toronto Maple Leafs team in a few months now when they start to get the regular season underway. And Dennis Hildeby, one of the guys that you're a huge fan of. We're obviously big. I'm a big fan of him as well. Made some very interesting comments, and you can look at his stats here. We'll get into the comments in a second, but I want to preface it with the stats here. And Darius, this guy with the Marlies has been very, very good. Borderline elite. Obviously, in the playoffs, he struggled a tiny bit compared to his regular season stats, but Darius, 41 games, 2.41 goals against average at 22 years old. And we talk about the Leafs goaltending situation with Joseph Woll, with all these guys. This is the guy that could look to come up, and this is exactly what he had to say on this. It's a long quote, so I'm not going to read the entirety of it, but feel free to pause and read it. But he said, obviously, the main goal is to get called up and eventually get a start. That's what you always strive for, and you don't really know until you try it out, so we'll see about that. But he's going to try to do his absolute best and show them that he's ready mentally, and he's going to see how he looks in training camp. We'll get back to the rest of these comments in a second, but Darius, what are your thoughts on these comments? He basically just came out and said, hey, I'm pushing for a spot this season on the team, even though realistically it might be a hard bargain to push for, considering Joseph Woll just signed an extension, and of course, they have their new goalie as well.
Yeah, I think he's not quite ready for the entire workload of an NHL season just yet. Do I think we're going to see Dennis Hildeby this season? Yes, I do think that is the case. Maybe for a small sample size of games, midway through the season or towards the end of the season, something like that. But like you got into his stats, right? And I'll start with that. His stats, he's putting up very good stats in the AHL already. And he played half a season last year, a little bit more than half a season. And putting up pretty solid numbers, right, in the AHL, which is, first of all, difficult to do, right, because the AHL is very close to the NHL game, and some people would even argue that it's harder in a way because a lot of guys are fighting for spots, and he's looked good at the AHL so far. So just keep him there. Make sure he, builds up that confidence. Don't bring him up too early and ruin his confidence. Make sure he develops in the AHL, and then you can bring him up to the NHL probably in a year's time. And this guy, there's Easton Cowan, there's Fraser Minton, there's a lot of names in the Leafs organization that people are excited about. This is the guy I'm most excited for personally, right? He's a goaltender. He looks like he's going to be the goaltender of the future. He's still very young. He's only 22 years old, right? Goaltenders we see come into the league at 25, 26 when they, finally, start to make an impact in the league at least. So I'm excited for this player. And I like the fact, a lot of people are going to say, what else do you expect him to say? Of course he wants to make the team. Yes, but it's the drive and his determination, the things he's saying that makes me believe he's going to be a really good NHLer. And I love where his mindset's at. Much like Joseph Woll, right? He talks a lot about the mindset, not so much the physical aspect of the game. So I like where both of their minds are at. And I think they're going to be a very good tandem for years to come. I don't think he's going to play in the NHL full time this year, but I think we're finally going to see a couple games of Dennis Hildeby in the NHL this year. So it's going to be fun.
Yeah, they obviously signed Anthony Stolarz to that contract, which kind of limits his ability, and Dennis Hildeby that is, to play a prominent role this season, unless injuries do happen, though. Hopefully, God forbid, no injuries
Yeah.
happen, but injuries could happen to Joseph Woll. We've seen he's been injury prone so far throughout his short NHL career, and then, of course, Anthony Stolarz as well, but yeah, 2.41 goals against average in the AHL is not easy. When you look at a lot of the goalie stats in the AHL, it's hard to put up elite numbers down there for various, variety of reasons. Same with the NHL. It's hard to put up elite numbers, but he's doing just that. And when you look at kind of his drive and everything like that, you can see here he had his own balcony. It was insane as Dennis Hildeby reflected on life in the NHL and his path with the Marlies moving forward. And remember, he was up with the Leafs for a few days. Ultimately, last season, didn't get a start for the team. Darius, I literally remember covering that at the time on this channel. We were both excited for him to get a start and just see what it was like. I still think it would have been good for him to get at least one start just to get a taste of the NHL. Ultimately, they didn't. They went with Martin Jones at the time and just kind of kept going with things in that way. But I don't know, Darius. He's such an interesting prospect, and he is the future of the Toronto Maple Leafs in the goaltending department. Yes, they signed Joseph Woll, but if you just read the quote, it seems like he really wants, and again, I think he understands from a business perspective it's going to be hard for him to push this season for a spot. But you can see this here. He kind of reflected at the second part of the paragraph here on how his time in the NHL helped a little bit. He said, having seen all that and knowing what to expect is a huge relief from whenever a potential call up or next call up, might come. Knowing what they expect or knowing what to expect from practices, off ice training, and everything around lunch and breakfast makes me a lot calmer. And that's a big thing. He was already called up to the NHL. Yes, he didn't play, but he kind of got a feel for the atmosphere for the NHL level. So now when he gets called up, whether that's early in the season, whether that's later in the season, depending on injuries and his performance, it's going to be interesting to see, especially given how he does in training camp this season.
Yeah, and I think that's just the thing about last season. You know, when you have some time to reflect on that moment when he was called up, I think you and I both were saying, you know, we were really excited and hopefully he gets into a game, right? But I think looking back, I think it was a good thing that he didn't, right? Because you're dealing with all the stress of, you know, being called up to the NHL and you're excited, and maybe it's taking away from, you know, how calm you are and focusing in on the game. But he had an opportunity to be called up to the NHL. I think it was on a road trip too. I think they were on the road, and he's able to see how some of the guys go about their business, not just the guys, the players, but also other goaltenders, and a guy in Martin Jones who's gone far in the playoffs before, like a Stanley Cup final, right? And able to learn off these guys. So it wasn't just, you know, him not playing in those games. It's the fact that he was called up, able to see what you know, these guys do on a daily basis, because then when he is eventually called up this year, because, you know, things happen, I'm sure he's going to get into a game this year probably. He knows exactly what is going on, right? Like he can just jump in and he feels more comfortable and he's going to play better because of that. And eventually a couple years down the road, he's going to be, you know, ultimately, I think the goal here is for him to be the starter. We don't know what's going to happen with Joseph Woll at this point in time, but when he eventually becomes a regular, at least on the team, he'll know exactly what's going on. He'll feel comfortable and he can play his best. So I think how they're doing and going about his development is actually very smart. And I love his attitude towards it because, you know, like he said, it's exactly that. He got called up. He was able to see what was going on. So now the next time he comes up, he's going to be more calm. He'll know what's going on. He can play with that confidence.
Yeah, and really, it probably is a blessing in disguise he didn't play a game. And again, I don't think it would have mattered in the long term whether he got lit up, whether he had a great start, but him getting up with the team was important for his development, and that's kind of the big takeaway from this. And you can see here, I started out the year doing what I thought was enough and had to change a few things towards the middle of the season. He said later on at the end there, I found I had a great routine before and after practices and games, and I felt that my body was at its best in the playoffs, so I guess that's a good sign. No one can predict the future, so just going to take it day by day, see how the season goes, and whatever happens happens. And again, let him develop a little bit more in the AHL. Let him continue to prove that he is an elite goalie in the AHL, and then ultimately he can get that chance and get that call up to the NHL, where hopefully, again, he's 22 years old. Hopefully he can continue and be that goalie going forward for the Leafs, because they still need a 1A. Yes, Joseph Woll in theory right now is their 1A. He has an extension coming up, but hopefully he can continue to do that and really follow the footsteps of some of the other great goalies that came up from the AHL. But that'll wrap it up. Let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on this. Do you want to see Hildeby this year? Do you think he plays? Let us know. See you soon.